and I'm looking at this uncircumcised penis, and I'm like, what is this? Like, and like the wee just like dribbles out, and you're like, what? What? This is. How do I work with this?
It's way too warm to have a turtleneck on in this Sydney climate.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And I'm Roger.
And welcome to The Middle,
where we try to have thoughtful conversations
about awkward topics
on our search to find the middle.
That's fatphobic.
I don't feel war. I just own a way to see war.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II.
I act as if God exists.
Put your masks on.
How dare you! You have stolen my dreams, my childhood, with your empty words.
Andy, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm pretty rough, actually. Had a really bad night with my daughter. She came into the bed. She's been sick, and I was finally like minding my own business on my pillow, and she did a WWE style body slam, and she headbutted me right in the temple. I don't know if I've got internal bleeding or what, but it's like throbbing. There's pressure in my temple, and no one seems to care. No one seems to care.
I don't know. I'd take that over like where I thought you were going. I was expecting, yeah.
Well, with the amount of kids that I have, actually, that might be a better alternative for me.
I'll take that. Yeah. I told you to stop at one.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to listen to Elon as well. We need to repopulate the Earth.
Yeah, but doesn't he like outsource the parental duties? I don't know. He doesn't actually look after all 15, right? How many has he got?
Oh, I don't know. I think
lost count.
But he uses surrogates, if that's what you mean, or you mean he doesn't actually raise his own kids?
Well, I can't imagine him even becoming a billionaire if he was actively involved in the upbringing of his kids.
True. I imagine he's got some kind of commune style thing, right? Like where the interns come in, they all have to put in 1 hour of raising his kids.
That's why we wanted them all to come to the office, right?
Exactly. Talking about coming into the office, we have a very special guest joining us today. I want to introduce a good friend of mine, Reuben. Welcome to The Middle.
Hey guys! Wow! It's great to be here.
long time listener through the bushes. Now
That's right.
Coming on to join the pod.
That's right. You've like broken down the fourth wall, and you're letting the audience onto the stage.
And it can happen to you too. So just write into us, and you never know. You might end up on the pod with Andy and I. But thank you very much for coming on, Reuben. I think this was a very last minute thing for us. And there's been a lot going on in the news. Of course, everyone's talking about the Israel and Palestine conflict. And Andy and I have been, trying to get our heads around it. We had an initial reaction to everything and more about the protests really in Sydney. And I must admit, as I've been digesting it all and going through this journey of, re-educating myself on the situation, it's put me into quite a tailspin. And I've been, chatting to Andy about it every other day. That's been a form of therapy. And so naturally, as I messaged you the other night, you're the only Jewish person I know. So I thought, why not get you onto the pod and get a kind of different perspective on this, right? So it's what I wanted to kind of bring you on to have a chat about. And yeah, I don't know if you want to kind of introduce yourself or, let us know what you're all about.
For sure. And yeah, I never thought this day would come. And all it took was like my birthright and a war. And I get the call.
Sorry, I shouldn't have laughed.
You can definitely laugh.
That's not true. So if you didn't catch this bus, Reuben, I did have a segment about circumcision coming up that I probably would have given you a call for. So,
oh, good. I'm probably going to mention circumcision in my intro.
Yeah. Let's cut straight to it. Sorry.
So yes, my name's Reuben. I'm 43 years old, so I think I'm a little bit older than you guys. I'm just guessing though. I was born into a Jewish family on the North Shore of Sydney. I went to a Jewish school all the way through from preschool all the way to year 12. And after finishing high school, I went straight into university the next year. And that's probably when I drifted away from the Jewish community. That was around the time when well, mobile phones hadn't, not everyone had a mobile phone yet. So it was actually quite easy to not keep in touch with my group of friends in high school, because the way to keep in touch with them would be to call their home phone and ask their parent, usually their mother, to put them on the phone. And so, yeah,
Oh my God.
I had friends who lived in my neighborhood who weren't Jewish, and I just ended up hanging out with them. University was a great time for me, meeting lots of different people. So, yeah, while I know exactly why you've asked me to join for this episode, I actually only have one Jewish friend, but I do have a lot that I can talk about the topic.
No,
and
one
I'm
Jewish
eager-
friend.
that I met in university. Yeah, so, but I think that's good because it means that I'm not embedded in a way of thinking that the majority of the Jewish community has, and I want to say I think I'm in the middle.
Reuben, can I ask? So, I mean, like in terms of Jewish identity, right? Like, there's this distinct. Like, I mean, I think we should get some clarity over some concepts around being of Jewish faith, but also recognizing, though, that even if someone isn't religious or doesn't hold religious convictions, that they might still yet identify with their, their heritage, right? So, obviously, as personal as you want to make it, where do you fit? Like, what's your story in terms of sort of the religious aspect, but also the, obviously being part of a community or growing up as part of a community that maybe isn't just purely a religious concept?
Yeah, for sure. Good question. I think during high school, I think I felt religious when we were praying at synagogue or shul, as it's also known as. I might have even felt the presence of God. But yeah, then I turned 18 and lost interest in drinking, smoking, not going to shul anymore because it's boring. Let's just be honest there. And yeah, since then I haven't been religious at all. I like to joke that I'm a really like the worst Jew you'll meet. I didn't try pork, bacon until I was older. It's delicious. So there's always pork in our fridge a couple of times a week. I've got a funny story about the first time I ate a giant tiger prawn. Well, they're not a giant, just a nice big sized tiger prawn, and put the whole thing in my mouth. Across the table from my girlfriend at the time, her parents. And then it was like, well, that was the wrong thing to do, but I couldn't take it out of my mouth. We were in a fancy restaurant. So I just had to munch the whole thing down.
I thought it was turkey bacon.
Oh, there's definitely a meme in here somewhere with these vocals.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually didn't know that you went to a Jewish school and things like that. I mean, are your family quite religious, and have you kind of broken away from it, or is it very much they're just kind of cultural in that way?
I think our family was a little bit religious. We did go to synagogue for the high holy days, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Those are extra long services, extra boring. And at home, the family home was kept kosher until my mum started to let it slip a bit. The kosher butcher at the time was only in the eastern suburbs. And I remember they would come once a week or once a fortnight in a van and bring all this frozen meat. And it's quite expensive. So I think when the family finances started to get tight, starting to buy meat from Coles became a thing. And my dad worked hard when we sort of were teenagers and weren't interested in hanging out with him, and we just wanted to hang out with our friends. He started working 7 days a week, so he wasn't going to synagogue either. And so, yeah, things I think started to slip. And the way I think about my family and how religious they are, it was a bit of doing it for show for family and friends. Like, you don't want people to talk about, that you're eating pork, or but I don't think there was a spirituality of Judaism, a strong feeling in the family.
Yeah, it's listening to you talk, Reuben. It's actually there's a lot of parallels to my experience growing up. With the Asian background within Australia, and my parents had very strong Christian influences, and I grew up in the church as well and in the faith. But it's the same kind of thing. A lot of it is for community, it's for face, it's for the kind of outward show of, doing your part and raising, a good Asian boy in the community, right? So it's kind of interesting playing that line. I do think, though, that there is, and I want to ask you like a direct question, because I feel that there is something special when it comes to identity about being Jewish. Let's be honest, like less than 0.5% is Jewish, right? So it's no surprise that you're the only Jew I know, kind of thing. But yet, like you said, you managed to go to a Jewish-only school. There's like a strong sense of community, identity. There's very strong walls and demarcations around your culture. So maybe I'll ask you the question directly. Do you think there is something special about the Jewish identity when they live abroad?
Sure. Yes, I do think so. The fact it was the first believing in one God.
Monotheism.
Thank you. And really, one simple way of putting it is that Christianity is Judaism plus one extra prophet, and Islam is Judaism and Christianity plus another extra prophet. And they believe sort of everything the previous one believed, with a few tinkering with it.
It's like your iOS 1 and then 2 comes along and there's 3, but 3 is not backwards compatible to 1, unfortunately.
There was.
Now I'm wondering what's Android in this analogy.
Funny you should mention that, Andy, because I was listening to something today and they said that there's a weird correlation that 70% of jihadists use Android. You can look that up.
That's only because Apple doesn't support them in...
Sorry, Reuben, continue.
Yes, no, good. I mean, one heard at one point the view that Christianity took on because it was Judaism, but you didn't have to circumcise your children and you could eat whatever you wanted. So that was the appeal to get people on board there. But yeah, there is a lot of pride in the fact that it's not a race, it's a culture, it's a religion that has lasted many, many, many hundreds of years, that many different other nations have tried to destroy us, and we've survived. And there's a powerful identity there and a powerful sense of belonging that you're part of a special group of people that continue to live on into the ages. Yeah, and also the jokes.
We'll have to hear some of those jokes. But I mean, I guess the other thing, like, so when people talk about the world's major religions, right? You've got Christianity, Islam, Judaism, but like, I guess one thing that's maybe unique in comparing to the other ones, right, where you're talking, you've got, a couple of billion Christians, a couple of billion Muslims, but still a relatively small number. I mean, it's in the millions, but like still a relatively small number of people who would be classify themselves as of the Jewish faith. So how much, like, even the size, or like you look in a country like Australia where you have a community, but like it's this sense of like, oh, we're this small part of the community and we really need to band together and prolong, like, so it's almost like the weight of or the being in the ocean of so many other, that's actually like a strengthening bond, I guess.
Well, literally in the ocean, because you inhabit the eastern suburbs, but anyway.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a big part of it is that converting to Judaism is very difficult. If you're talking about Orthodox Judaism, and I should probably make the distinction here between Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox. The men with the hats and the peyot, the hair, the dangling out next to the ears, and the black coats, that's ultra-Orthodox. They're very, very, very religious, bit crazy. Orthodox is normal, I would say normal Judaism. And then there's Reform, Progressive, where they've a bit lax on the rules. They've changed some of the rules. Women can be rabbis at synagogue. Men and women can sit together. They're not separated, so it's not as strict. And yeah, I was born into it.
Is there an equivalent of Hillsong for Judaism?
No.
Oh man,
There probably
totally
is. There are some weird sects.
This could be like a new niche that someone could like come in and take and grow.
Man, all I'm thinking now is like, you know how they wear the Madonna mics? They've got like a little pin to hold back the curly sideburn.
No, there are some weird sects out there. I heard of a group, a small community in Israel, where they don't believe in the synagogue. They don't believe in coming together as a community in a shul with, you know, in a big hall with a rabbi. They go out into nature and they go and pray up a tree, and that's their thing. So yeah, there are some different kinds, but I don't think there's the
probably lower overheads that way out in nature. So Reuben, thanks for sharing a little bit about your background, and I want to kind of talk about some like lighter things first before I know inevitably we'll get into a little bit more of a serious space with what's happening in the world right now. But you did mention you did bring up circumcision actually, and it's always been a bit of a curiosity for me, and I kind of recall a conversation we had many years ago about the topic, and you kind of said to me, it's like, you know, it's very, very fundamental to the Jewish faith and what God has asked you to do around upbringing and how you manage your children. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of understand that, because I think that's something that probably is a curiosity for a lot of people, but they're probably very uncomfortable to ask.
Yeah, and it was also a question from my wife. So she's not Jewish. Yeah, I've never had a Jewish girlfriend, and yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I didn't know any. I didn't know any Jews by the time I was having girlfriends. Like, I'm one of four, and my older brother, he moved to Israel and married a Jewish woman there, which is quite easy to do. There are lots of them there. And my older sister also married a Jewish man, though he comes from the Reform sort of progressive side of Judaism. And that was a bit difficult for some of my extended family. I think some of them wouldn't go to their wedding and wouldn't say it was a Jewish wedding. But the fact that my brother had married a Jewish woman, that was a tick. And then, you know, my older sister, you know, that's good enough. So they were happy with that. So when it came to me and I wasn't interested in dating Jewish women, yeah, they tried to encourage
barriers down for you.
Yeah, they tried to encourage me, but I wasn't having any of it, so it didn't happen.
Because there's separate apps for it, is what I hear.
I think so.
That's what I.
No, I could have, and they did encourage me. They did say, "Oh, we could set you up." Yeah, it's like, nah, not doing that. Not doing that. But yes, eventually I did meet my wife, and we got married, and yeah, we talked about, and she knew that I wasn't religious, but I did have a strong Jewish identity, and so it was a question for her that if we were going to have if we ended up having boys, and we did, we have two, that what about the circumcision? And it was a very strong thing for me to decide that, and it does come down to the heart of Jewish identity. The first Jew was Abraham, and from what I remember from my schooling, when God came to meet him, to speak with him, because he saw something special in this man. He'd broken all the idols in his dad's idol shop and said, this is all BS. It would only make sense that there's only one God. And then lo and behold, God came down and said, well, you're going to be the first Jew. And the deal was two things, that Abraham had to circumcise himself and circumcise his sons. And the other thing he had to do, he just had to believe in the one God. And in return, God would ensure that his people, the Jewish people, would live forever. And the Jewish line would continue forever. So, I mean, the kosher laws came in much, much later than that. The Ten Commandments came much, 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 much later than that. But the very beginning, it was circumcision and believing in one God.
Wow.
Yeah.
I suppose you probably need to sweeten the deal pretty hard to get a grown man to circumcise himself and his son. So something like live forever is probably what you got to put on the table. But so
was that was sort of like in contemplating this, was that was it a religious conviction for you, or was it more a like a cultural sort of
Yeah,
identity
cultural.
thing?
Yeah, like you probably are aware that in the Jewish religion, it's passed through the mother. So many people have said to me, "Oh, your kids aren't Jewish," but that's like an Orthodox rule, and I don't belong to an Orthodox synagogue. I don't have a rabbi. I don't need anyone to tell me if I'm Jewish or not Jewish. And my children, they can decide if they want to have a Jewish identity or not. Yes, if they want to go to a Jewish school, if they want to go join a Jewish synagogue, they'll need to convert. And that's something that they can choose to do. But I actually wouldn't advise them to do that, because I think they can just have their own Jewish identity and live their own Jewish life and make up their own rules.
I was just thinking that it's a bit like, conferring citizenship on your children, right? So you apply, you might live in another country, but you might apply for a passport, right? So it's just like, you're going through immigration, you have to whip your willy out sort of thing. So,
though the circumcision of my children were done by pediatric surgeons, not by a moil, who's like a rabbi that is trained and well experienced in doing it, because my wife wouldn't. I mean, I had no interest in it being a religious ceremony. Pediatric surgeons are very good, so I was happy with that. So it might not even be viewed as a valid religious circumcision, but I don't care. Yeah.
Now I'm just thinking back to my Seinfeld, my knowledge of Seinfeld. Is it a bris? Is it called a bris?
Bris, that's right. Yeah. I think that's the Yiddish. Yeah.
And like, just I think I'm trying to recall our conversation about this, and I think one of the things I was wondering at the time was how much of this is just actually you want your sons to look like you. Like, does that play a part of it? Just be like, look, I want, like, when we sing in the shower or whatever, I want us to have the same hardware.
Avoid the uncomfortable conversation.
Yeah.
There is an aspect to that. And I remember, because it was like a month before they got circumcised, and I'm like changing nappies, and I'm looking at this uncircumcised penis, and I'm like, what is this? Like, and like the wee just like dribbles out, and you're like, what? This is, how do I work with this? This is a mess.
It's way too warm to have a turtleneck on in this Sydney climate. Skippy. Maybe we might progress to one day where the child can decide. He can opt into it when he's a certain age.
I'm not sure, because then why would you do it? But look, I agree it's debatable. I think it's up to individuals to choose. But in my view, I couldn't call my children Jewish or say they're Jewish unless they were circumcised. So yeah, it was very important. But yeah, it was difficult.
Is there still any contention of the health for like medical or health reasons? Because it was a thing, right? Like it's not just a purely.
I don't think it's a thing.
No, but no, like it was. Like, I mean,
sponsored by the Jewish Medical Board. That somehow is like cleaner or something.
The Jewish community would talk. You would hear these are all the benefits of circumcision, and it's better health-wise. There's a thing about that. Women having sex with a man who's not circumcised, there's a higher risk of getting some cancer. I think it's cancer. But actually, more modern medical science has sort of debunked it all, that it's not unhealthier to not be circumcised. And actually, the first pediatrician that I took my first son to, he even gave me like an information sheet explaining that you shouldn't get your child circumcised if you're just worried about the penis getting dirty and then having problems. Like, you can clean a child's penis properly and it can work. Don't get circumcised just for that issue.
Yeah, there's I know. Okay, I'll tell. I'll kind of change a few names around, but I do.
We know we're talking about yourself.
I do know a friend, and they not Jewish, obviously, and their little boy was not circumcised and had a problem with his foreskin being too tight. And so this is a thing where if they're not able to retract the foreskin below the penis head, it can cause issues as the child's genitals grow, right? As as the head grows. And so what they were advised by the pediatrician was they had to use this special cream that was made to make the foreskin more elastic. And essentially the boy was on forced masturbation duty for like, so it was like, get in there and, like fucking massage your willy like every night and until it could go. And if they didn't do that, if they didn't manage to stretch it naturally with this cream, they'd have to circumcise. So there's something there about, when the turtleneck doesn't match the head circumference, there can be issues. All right, out of the gutter and into the abyss. I'm really curious to kind of understand how discrimination has been felt and how it's been processed growing up in Australia. And I just wondered if you have any experiences on that.
Not in Australia. I've travelled around the world twice, once clockwise, once anti-clockwise, and I went to Indonesia, which is known to not be a supporter of Israel. And you hide your Israeli passport somewhere in your bag, and you hope no one finds it because you just don't want to have any problems. But yeah, I've never actually experienced any anti-Semitism myself.
Would you, having an Israeli passport, was there an expectation that you do like a what's the word I'm looking for? Service,
Army service.
National
service.
service.
Yeah. I do have a story about that. When I was in Israel for my brother's wedding, I was probably in my 30s. When I went to leave Israel, and I got to customs, the person checks things, and they're like, "Oh, just stand over there." I'm like, "Oh, okay, I'll do that." And then I was taken into an office, and it wasn't scary at all. But basically, they said, "You haven't done your army service, and you don't have an exemption. We'll let you leave the country this time, but if you come back and you don't have an exemption or you haven't done your service, then we won't let you leave next time." And I was like, cool, no worries. And came back to Australia. And then a couple of years later, my brother had his first child, and the family were going over to Israel to see the baby. And I was like, oh yeah, hadn't gotten around to organizing that exemption. So I contacted the Israeli, I think it's the consulate, they're in Canberra, and it was just ridiculous. You call up, there's like press 1, press 2 for this, and like you can just never get through to someone. And eventually I was just randomly pressing buttons to go to random departments and finally got someone. And they ended up sending me these like 3 forms that were in Hebrew. And look, I learned a bit of Hebrew at Jewish school, but I'm not fluent and I can't read it. Like I can't read a government form. So I had to take photos of it, send it to my brother or to my mother and get help in filling it out. I think I did fill it out in Hebrew and I had to remember the Hebrew letters. And I managed to do it and I sent it back. But it was interesting because there was a lot of overlap in the forms. I was putting the same information in different forms. And actually I had no clue what each form was for. It just didn't make any sense. And nowhere did I say, this is the reason why I can't do army service. Anyway, I sent it in and then it was getting close to when my flight was due. And then finally I got this letter back from the consulate and I opened it up and it was in Hebrew. So I'm like, what does this say? I mean, these days you could just take a photo and do Google Lens and it would translate it for you live. But yeah, I had to send a photo to my mother and she just wrote back, "You must bring this document with you. You must show it at the airport." And so I reply back, "But what does it say?" And she replies back, "They don't want you in the army." Yeah, I'm too old, I know.
That 12-week course of Krav Maga, does that count towards my service? Given that you've gone through most of your life not really experiencing that in Australia, I wonder how you felt over the last couple of weeks through all the demonstrations, and there's just much more outwardly the rhetoric, the kind of discussion has kind of thrust the Jewish community into the spotlight. Has that kind of shattered that view a bit for you, or have you rationalized it another way?
Yeah, good question. And I did have a listen to the chat you guys had about it a week or so ago. And it was interesting. I've got a lot of thoughts about it. First of all, when they lit up the Opera House in the blue and white, it didn't even look like the Israeli flag. You could barely make out the blue.
I know.
Well,
was
I
so
think someone
disappointed.
got the lights they used for the Ukraine conflict and just got some cellophane from the news agency.
I was expecting, so when I heard that, I hadn't seen the images. I was expecting a full Israeli flag to be there, like in kind of
like
in
the Star
Technicolor.
of David. But it just looked like because the Opera House is already white, so it just looked like the Opera House was white as normal, with just like some bluishness on the side. Like, it wasn't very good.
So that whole protest was just about a blue-hued light,
It wasn't very good.
How can we put on Vivid, where you have literal animations going across the Opera House, and then you don't shell out for like an actual Israeli flag? I don't get it.
I guess it was rushed, and they just didn't have time to put the Star of David in there. I mean, it was probably a good thing. It would have made the protesters angrier, and they were already. And I appreciate, their anger and how upset they were about it. I don't know if it would have been a good idea to light up the harbour bridge in the black, green, red, and white of the Palestinian flag. Just having them like opposite each other, facing off, like isn't really the right look either. Shooting fireworks off the bridge, like probably.
No, Reuben, you have to find a much smaller bridge for the Palestinian one, unfortunately.
Maybe Fort Denniston.
Yeah.
But then, the protest itself, I think it's fully valid that for them to be upset about the Opera House, that happening with the Opera House. And then I thought the anti-Semitism at the rally, I thought it's in the realms of expectation. And I have to be careful about this. I don't want to say that, of course, Palestinian protesters hate the Jews and of course they're anti-Semitic. And I've actually been quite proud and respectful of what the protest leaders have said about the anti-Semitism at their rally and committing that it would not happen again and that they're not welcome. I don't think that happens elsewhere in the world. Like in Iran, I would say even in England, I wouldn't be surprised if there's anti-Semitism at these rallies. And, I half don't blame them. Israel is a Jewish state. Like, unequivocally, that is a fact. It's there's been a lot of debate about should Israel become a true multicultural country. But I don't think that'll ever change. It will always be a Jewish country. So, all the leaders that are making the war decisions, they're all Jewish. So, if they're going to say F the Jews, it's almost factually correct. But I do agree that it should be condemned appropriately, because you don't want that leading to violence against innocent Jews that have nothing to do with anything, that are just walking around the streets of Sydney. We definitely want to make sure there aren't acts of vandalism and attacks on synagogues or schools. So I think it was the right response. But I wasn't affected by watching the scenes. It didn't surprise me.
How did you feel? I mean, so this is something that's unfolding. It's still unfolding even now, several weeks after the events. But at the time of the protests, there wasn't the gestation of this where you could say, "Oh well, Israel's now overreacted, and now it's bombing poor Palestinians or whatever." We hadn't got to that stage yet. It was very much just the equivalent of 9/11 in Israel's just happened, and the first instincts of a group of people who was to go out and protest Israel. Like, I mean, I guess now. I'm not sure whether your identity is with the state of Israel per se, or how much of that connects with you. But I guess certainly, thinking about, I mean, you mentioned you've got a brother living abroad, so I presume that it's easier to, empathize. It's a bit closer to home sort of thing. It does seem a little bit odd that the first thing you do, is protest against another group of people who've been affected by a really quite an indefensible sort of situation.
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to remember that wasn't the first stone that was cast, and it's a very appropriate point to make that before the breach of the blockade and the invasion, I guess you can say, of Israel, things were happening the week before that were hurting the Palestinian people. So I fully understand that the Palestinian community feel that no one's listening to their plight, and it must be very disappointing for them that as soon as it's back in the headline, it's sort of anti-Palestinian event, like something that looks bad for them. And I think they do want to remind everyone that the occupation is still ongoing, the people are still suffering, and just because Hamas has done what they've done doesn't mean that we should stop feeling sympathy for the Palestinian people.
It's a very, very measured response, Reuben. I've got to say, my initial thoughts, and some of this didn't make it to the episode actually in a discussion between Andy and I, but I'm not sure whether it was actually seeing the footage or what it was, but I actually made the mistake of watching one too many videos on the incursion by Hamas into Israel. And I have to say, as a father, as, just a general human being, it really traumatized me in a way that hasn't really I've recovered from just yet. And I must say that having looked at those acts, to me, it's just kind of almost unthinkable to not condemn them for what they are, as probably some of the worst things humans can do to each other.
Yeah, and this attack is exponentially more devastating than things in the past. I'm not sure I agree with the 9/11 comparison. I don't know. It's just planes into the Twin Towers versus scooters crossing over the border. Like, I don't know.
There was some hang gliding action.
I missed the hang glide. There was a drone.
That's how they got into the music festival. There was hand gliding into. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow, that's some preparation. Like, I watch the news every night, and this time when they warned me that there was going to be some confronting images, I kept watching, because of course I'm going to kept watching. And then I saw some stuff, and then I was like, that's why they had the warning. And I do feel traumatized from that. And there are some of the footage of the way the hostages were treated. Them are just like their clothes bloody, and these are just civilians. But it's not completely different to things in the past. It was a while ago when it wasn't uncommon for a terrorist to get into Tel Aviv and blow himself up in a cafe, blow himself up on a bus, and there'd be bits of bodies everywhere. Those were horrific as well, but they were sort of one event. It's been very, very, very rare that hostages or even bodies were taken. Do you remember the story of Gilad Shalit? I think I've got his name right. He was an Israeli soldier that was captured by Hamas. And I think it took like 8 years to organize the prisoner swap. And that was just one soldier. And now this time there's hundreds of hostages, 1,000 bodies. Yeah, it's an absolute mess. And I don't know if you're aware that the Israel government has like a deal with its citizens that if you get in trouble anywhere in the world, they will come and help you. And actually, I had a cousin who went to India, and he spent quite a bit of time in India, in remote parts of India, just having an adventure. And then he disappeared. He left the backpacker hostel, went for a walk, left his belongings, never came back. And the Israeli government sent personnel, sent investigators, with the permission, with the sort of agreement of the Indian authorities. And that's not uncommon. Israel will protect Jews all around the world. Israeli citizen all around the world. So anyone that is captured by Hamas, even a dead body that is captured by Hamas, Israel needs to do whatever it can to get them back. But this is a very different situation where there isn't a let's stop hostilities and start negotiating a prisoner swap. Israel's just gone in really, really, really aggressive. And there's a lot of fear that the hostages won't be protected. And they may be executed or they may be killed in the fighting.
Yeah. I guess I want to kind of navigate into the discussion a little bit more, right? So I've kind of put my chips on the table around the equivalence of this, of the axe on one side. And I know that that's not a view that's shared by a lot of people. They do pretty much roll out a bit of a trope that, two wrongs don't make a right, and that everyone's the same regardless of intent, which I don't agree with. I don't agree with at all. Because I think that intent is important in this scenario because it gives you a prediction of what would happen if that party had more power and more agency and more technology, what they would do. And I think that makes all the difference in this equation. If Hamas had the same military might as Israel, for example, what would they do, right? Well, we know because they tell us. Do you believe that Hamas is a terrorist organization? Do you I suppose, acknowledge that they need to be removed from the Gaza Strip?
Yep, good question. From what I'm aware, the Hamas organization has different branches, and a lot of it is charity, is humanitarian, is helping the people. And then there's the militant wing, which is much well known. Yeah, and this is where I have my main criticism with the media when they talk about what Israel's doing, what the Palestinians are doing. I think everyone seems to not mention most of the time. Actually, I don't even remember the last time it was mentioned that, like, the Hamas charter they have as an organization is they call for the destruction of Israel. And yeah, when you've got two sides that are both committing war crimes, different kinds of war crimes, and war crimes need to be proven in court, and it's possible Israel isn't committing war crimes, but you see a lot of the footage and you're like, how could they possibly not be committing war crimes? Like, maybe every time a civilian is killed in Gaza, it's because that area, that location was being used to launch rockets, and therefore it's not a war crime. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not a judge of war crimes. But I do think that the current situation can't continue. You can't keep Hamas there in power. And Israel is just not going to let it happen. Because if there's a ceasefire, if it goes back to normal, this is just going to happen again. And this is just so much more worse than previous times. It's just completely unacceptable for it to continue.
What do you, I mean, okay, so there's a situation where, forget the moralizing of this issue of who's right, who's wrong and all that, but come back to the almost like a pure consequentialist sort of view of the world, right? Where, every action will have a set of consequences. And, I think there's probably a couple of schools of thought. One is the one you've set out, which is that got to destroy the architecture of Hamas and all the, that yes, it's a philosophy and an ideology, but they've also got a leadership. They've also got resources. So, attack the concrete nature of the beast. But then on the other hand, and another school of thought might be that, and this is maybe a more generic one that gets used against sort of intervening, maybe in a not very calculated way in parts of the world like the middle, in the Middle East, where we don't maybe necessarily understand all the nuances of those societies, and that actually if you give more ammunition to the propagandists of that are going to train the next generation to believe that they're oppressed and and you're giving them a gift, so right now a heavy-handed response is almost giving a gift to the next, and it might not be Hamas, it might be the next incarnation of that sort of a movement, and that therefore you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you either you tolerate but then this stuff keeps happening, or you crush it, but then you're going to have to completely crush it. So, and then it's just going to grow back even bigger, right? And
I would add to that the next level of inquiry, right? And I've seen this a lot from the Australian political side. They're trying to do their best to, calm everyone down. And they try to make this real distinction between the sins of Hamas versus the Palestinian people, right? But the more you scratch that and the more you turn that page, like you said, you find out that things aren't so black and white, that the Hamas is a movement. It is integrated into Palestinian life day to day. Like you said, there's a women's movement, there's a charity movement, there's a humanitarian side, there's a militant side, all these kind of things, right? You'd be forgiven to say, based on the protests and things that are coming out, that they actually do have quite a bit of support from the Palestinian people and people who support their cause. So I kind of wonder in all this around, like, if you agree that they need to, if you kind of have a stance that they need to be removed, what does that really mean for the Palestinian people?
Yeah, and we should also mention that Hamas was voted in by Gazan. I don't know how long ago it was. It was a while ago.
2006, and they haven't held one since.
I don't think they've retested that proposition
recently. They haven't done another election.
They built a few schools and hospitals, got in, and then never held another ballot.
So for many years, Fatah was the governing body of the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. And attempts were made to reach deals with Israel. There was the famous shaking of the hands with Bill Clinton on the White House lawn, the Oslo Agreement, but we know it never happened. And then I understand that the Palestinian people kicked out Fatah because of corruption. They were sick and tired of the Fatah politicians, leaders, lining their own pockets and making the most of the power that they had. And they were sick of that, and so they went to Hamas. Now, I have no idea how much the Palestinian people support Hamas. You hear journalists say, there was one correspondent who was saying he was in Gaza and there was a Hamas fighter preparing a rocket to shoot at Israel, and then a Palestinian woman came to her front door and was yelling at him, like, why are you putting me in danger? You shoot that, they're going to bomb this place. But you could be right. Maybe the majority completely support Hamas, completely support the war on Israel. I mean, there has been so much bloodshed. We were already at the point where everyone on both sides has so much hatred for the other side because of someone they know that has been killed by injustices. We're generation deep into that.
Yeah.
You want to hear my solution?
Been waiting for it.
I'm going to solve the Middle East. I mean, it's never going to happen. But life needs to be made better for the Palestinians. And this is what Israel doesn't do. It's not the carrot and the stick. That's not the right analogy. But really, any person, anywhere in the world, all they want is peace and prosperity. And life is so terrible for the Palestinian. If there could be a situation where economic investment could be made in the Palestinian territories, it would be billions of dollars. Like, there are countries all over the world that would be sending so much money to the Palestinians to make their cities, to rebuild, to make their towns, their country flourish. And when people are happy, when people have prosperity, the unemployment rate, it's just farcical. The poverty is just ridiculous. If you could turn that around, I think people might forget about war.
I'm going to have to disagree. And I think this is the real bit that I've hit a wall with in my thinking. And I think that we in the West cannot get our head around this idea behind a different mindset, a different worldview of core values and belief. Like, it's so easy to think that everyone just wants to have a better life and have the latest iPhone and this and that. That is not what we're dealing with.
I believe that when your life is so shit and you've got nothing to live for and you've got people in power telling you that this is what you're going to do, you don't really have much choice. And it might be convenient to believe it. It's like how kids, like my 7-year-old, probably knows that Santa doesn't exist, but it's convenient to suspend his disbelief because he gets presents. By the way, yes, we have Christmas, and we have Hanukkah.
That's ask.
Best of both worlds, baby.
Roger, you brought up, what are the factors underpinning this behavior? Is it, are we on the West sort of obsession with, we just got to like economically develop everyone and bring them up, and then we'll have peace. And I do think that like there's probably somewhere in between, right? I don't think you can have extremist ideologies take root if you don't also have extreme conditions. So there are plenty of Muslim dominant countries on the planet that don't have high rates of terrorism, right? Or that whose people are attracted to extreme ideas, right? And I guess it's only the presence of victimhood or the story of victimhood is really powerful, right? So injustice and the stories you can tell about that, it's really powerful for extremists. But if you go to Saudi Arabia or Qatar or places like that, they want to go shopping in the shopping mall, in the air-conditioned shopping mall. They don't want to. I mean, very few, I think, are contemplating getting on a Hilux ute and with their AK-47 and shooting up the next sort of Christian or Jewish person they meet, right? So I do think there's probably a bit of both, but I guess maybe, Reuben, to your vision, it's kind of like a long-term project, right? It's not going to solve any overnight problem, right? It's going to be something that's multi-generational, and it's probably like, where do we want to be in 100 years' time, I guess.
Look, I mean, indoctrination starts early. That's how it works. And that's why it takes generations to sweat things out when there is a big change, right? And part of the rabbit hole this week has been seeing some of that indoctrination in action, and it's not pretty. Cartoons for kids and things like that, right? That are already influencing them before they even form their own sense of self-identity. So this thing has really deep roots. They're going to take a long time. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's a mistake in the West to think that everyone's like us. Everyone responds to the same things that we do, and what it means to live a happy life and fulfilling life is the same. And that is not the case. And to your point, this idea that terrorists are not born, they're made, or through oppression and through other things like that. Yeah, I think that there's a side of that too. There's a fertile ground where people can be recruited into these extreme fundamentalist groups, and we know that it's not always as clear as that, because a lot of people who join this movement in the West are often highly educated and come from the upper middle class. So it's not as simple as just this idea of like oppressed and poverty, and this is breeding ground for it all. I think that if we're talking about like peace, the thing that really gets me about the condemnation of like Hamas and all this is that if you have a doctrine around essentially wiping out the Jewish people and blowing Israel off the map, where in the world can you negotiate with that, right? So if people really want peace and they really want a partner for peace, it's not going to happen with a party like Hamas, all right? And I think that people are struggling to accept that idea, because when you have these chants and things like that from the river to the sea and all this kind of stuff, it's you can slice and dice it however you want, but you're not going to get a two-state solution with that, right?
Well, there was an offer for a two-state solution.
They chose the chant.
It was rejected.
They chose the chant. At Camp David, there was 97% of
97%. You know it.
97%.
Well done, Roger.
And it was that's not how. And then what happened? What is it? A couple of weeks later, the second Intifada come. And this is also I think the case too that I see that in the West we also really struggle with a narrative, especially around the woke narrative of I need there to be an oppressed and an oppressor. I need it to be like that, right? And so all I can see now is like a David and Goliath, and how the irony of the situation that the Jews are on the wrong side of that. They're probably the most oppressed people of all time, are now a victim of their own success, overrepresented in every single position of power and contribution across the globe, but somehow they're the oppressor now, right? Like, talk to me, Reuben, because I can understand your leanings on this. People are calling for a ceasefire. Talk to me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, the ceasefire it's just going to put things back to where we were before. It's just going to give Hamas time to regroup and plan their next attacks. And I think it's quite clear that Israel has had enough. And Israel doesn't really listen to the rest of the world much. They're just concentrating on what they need to do to survive. So, of course, when the US has influence and can apply leverage and pressure that the Israelis will be forced to consider. But other than that, I mean, I do think it's relevant to discuss the protests around the world in Sydney. But the Israeli government's not paying attention. I don't think they even know.
Well, why should
to do the Opera House in blue and white. It's not they're not trying to. Well, they're barely trying to win a PR war, and they're quite, what's the word, arrogant. They're just going to do what they think they need to do, and they don't really care what the rest of the world thinks in some respects, because if they did, they won't end up protecting their citizens.
But also, why should they, right? Aren't we taking the rules of the Middle East and trying to apply it in this weird Western ideology of morality? Why would they respond to that, right? The last time that they pulled out and conceded land in the Gaza Strip, right? And they literally dug up the graves and forcibly removed, 6,000 of their own Israeli citizens to lots of protests. They did that and they kind of went back. The Gaza's been bombing them ever since. Every time they concede any inch of land, it just makes the problem worse. They just have a tighter front to battle on. Why would they listen to us?
But also, Roger, all of the vocal voices in countries like Australia, and it's not like the Australian government. It's people within Australia. They don't know what it's like to live in this part of the world. It's the David and Goliath heuristic that you mentioned. Like, I'm someone who supports the little guy, and this person looks like they're the oppressed, and this country over here is rich and has, all this power, and it's got a big military too. Yeah, I don't like that. That doesn't sound very good. And people are just defaulting to these rules of thumb and saying, I might go and protest that because I'm someone who protests. I'm that kind of person. I live in the inner west. Let's have a boycott against Israel because that's what my council's doing. It's not very well thought through, right? So there's all these shades of grey and people just giving it the black and white.
What about the LGBT community doing it? Like, isn't that like just my mind is melting? Like, why? Just because you are aligned to the left and liberal causes, surely you are not supporting a regime in which everything that you fought for is going to be compromised, right? Like, and yes, I understand the one little aspect of like human suffering, but if this regime succeeds and spreads, it's going to be the detriment of your causes that you've fought for. Like, I don't understand. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't think of myself, I'm left-leaning and I'm for liberal causes, and then tell me what they are and I'll sign up. I don't have that identity. I just think about each topic for what it is. But yeah, like a lot of the episodes that you guys have done, I haven't agreed with you. And it's been really frustrating that I can't get a word in. But generally speaking, I do find it strange that I have a lot of support for the causes that the left bring, except for this. And this I'm on, and I'm not trying to be on a side. I'm just judging it for what it is. And it was a question I was going to have for you guys, because I am interested in what everyday, normal, non-Jewish, non-Israelis people think about things that you don't have skin in the game, so to speak.
I have my skin, thank you very much. Just the right amount of skin.
Yeah. Are we doing the circumcision?
He was the one that had to do the daily creaming routine.
Are we doing 2 episodes at the same time? Is this a circumcision episode as well?
How you market something versus what you sell, it's 2 different things, Reuben.
But when I'm watching the news, or I don't do much social media, and when I see these protests, I do wonder how much people believe that the Palestinians are upset because of the blockade, and not that the blockade is there because Hamas is upset with Israel. Because it seems that is missed. And it just, I do see the story, the perspective a lot of Israel being the oppressor. And if Israel just stops being mean, so to speak, then Hamas will stop attacking.
Yeah, I reckon if you went down the street and you asked 100 people, I don't even think the average Australian that's not no skin in the game would even appreciate that level of nuance. Like I don't even think. I think if you said blockade, they would be like, "What do you mean?" I honestly don't think that's well understood. Like even to that level, I would think that the typical person on the street would just be like, "Oh, here's okay." There's some fight between Israel and Palestinians around some land, and they're fighting each other about it. I think that would be the shortcut. So I don't even think that it registers with people.
I was saying, what about the Palestinian protesters? If I went to a Palestinian protest with my Israeli flag, no, I'll get arrested. I'm not going to do that. And I asked them, okay, you want to free Palestine? Totally agree with you. What should we do about Hamas? What would you say should Hamas do? I don't even know what they'd say.
I don't think they're protesting for nuanced, outcomes here, or a nuanced call to action. I think it's just like, oh, this is my fellow people, my brothers and sisters, and I don't really know anything about the thing, but I know that I kind of support them because they're like me, and I'm supposed to. Like that's what my friends and family do as well. And I think that's the problem here. Like no one's doing deep thinking unless you're. I think people in Israel do deep thinking every day about it because they're always worried about rockets and things like that. And equally, people in Palestine are doing deep thinking too because of similar issues. But I think outside of that, I think the rest of the world, I don't think we really know what we're talking about. And even if we studied at university as our, we're academics studying it our whole lives, I still don't think we could understand it unless you're living there and you have the threat. I mean, it's very different. So anyway.
Yeah, Reuben, I tend to agree. I think that the problem that I see with this topic is that it's been pushed into the media cycle, and rightly so. And I think the public, or just the general Joe Schmo, has been used to just getting online and having a go, just having a say about everything, right? Or whether it's the referendum or gay marriage or this and that. I just I don't feel any shame or any kind of self esteem issues about going online and just spouting something, right? Because it's like the FU through it, mooning someone through a driving car. No one's going to catch you. And you're gone. You move on to the next suburb. And
well, Roger, just on that, the classic example of that is Jamie Lee Curtis posting on Twitter or whatever it's called now in support of Israel and all that, but with a picture of a kid from Palestine.
The old bait and switch.
This is the level of
that's kind of like hedging your bets right there. It's if they read the headline or they look at the picture, man. But what I was going to say is that we're so used to being able to throw our hat. Everyone thinks, when you go to Grilled and they give you the little bottle cap, and on your way out you choose the charity. So it's going to be epileptic dogs or children's that lost their frisbee over the fence, and you just put it in, right? I think everyone's so used to that. The problem is this is a topic that requires a modicum of history and actual thinking. And I look at some of those protesters, I'm like, man, you guys are brave, because if anyone asks you any kind of nuanced question, you're fucked. And you obviously just don't care about that because you just go back to your chant, right? Or whatever you wrote on your crappy piece of cardboard. I'll put it this way. I opened up Instagram the other day and I was presented with a clip, a montage of Saddam Hussein receiving his verdict about his crimes in America. And the comments and the captions were littered with, finally, a strong Arab leader that stands up for Muslims everywhere. And people bring him back. Where is he? Get him back in power. And it's he's dead. People just don't understand. They're oh, isn't it great? Oh, free Palestine, praise to, and then all this stuff. And it's bro, this guy killed so many of his own citizens. That people just do not comprehend the situation. They need to watch that episode of South Park, right? I think that it's just that the memory and the people that are throwing their hat in the ring just have no idea. They're just lashing out in colors and shapes in front of them and just moving on with their day. It's a circus. But you know what I mean? That's what Q&A is about. God, I mean, if you can bring yourself to watch Q&A, it's because you love the conflict and love the drama of that stuff. It's not because you came for nuanced conversation or answers, right? And I think that is a prime example of intellectualism hidden in just entertainment. All right.
You ready for a Jewish joke?
I think you should tell that Jewish joke about the repatriation flight.
So, when the news came out, and it was emotional, I wasn't immediately concerned for my family, for my brother. They live more in the north of Tel Aviv. And so, he was sending me messages. He said that he can't walk his dog, which, by the way, when I saw photos of his new dog, I was like, that looks like a dingo. And now he thinks it really is a dingo. It's not a dingo. But he's just I'm an Australian and I have a dingo for a dog in Israel. Okay, you can think that. But he can no longer walk his dog in the fields around his town anymore, because the Iron Dome defense system won't shoot down a rocket if it's going to land in a place where there isn't, not a built up area. So they were getting into bomb shelters when sirens were going off. But I know that I need to add to this. Oh, my poor brother can't walk his dog in a field while the Palestinian people are completely trapped. I get that you've got to, you can't say one without the other. But look, when he called me and he said, we want to get on one of these repatriation flights, and he wanted my help in organising a place for him to stay, for him and his family to stay. He's got three boys.
Man, that's even harder than ending this conflict, trying to find a rental property in Sydney.
Well, family has hooked him up. So, and actually, he was asking for my help, and I actually got emotional. They are in fear, and I welled up a little bit. Wow, we need to help. But then again, I wasn't quite sure if he was going to be accepted onto one of the repatriation flights, given he doesn't live in the worst area But yeah, he did. He went to Dubai with his family on Qatar Airways. I think I haven't heard anyone in the media talk about, is there any irony here that Qatar Airways have come to the rescue of Australians? We really want to fly Australians into your country. And we promise we won't strip search them anymore. But yeah, he's here. He's not sure when they're going to get back. But yeah, after he visited my mum, and then I was speaking to her, she was kind of trying to tell me that I think there's a perspective in the family that maybe he just wanted a free flight to Australia. And that would be a Jewish thing.
Were the flights actually
they're
free, or was it just?
They're the free
Oh, okay. So my sorry, I didn't appreciate that. It was just one of those things.
The government paid for them.
You're going to break the meal allocator on Qantas around kosher meals. Do they have like Airbnb there where they can rent out their house, make a couple of bucks while they're away?
Yeah, and I don't know what they do. I haven't asked about the dog, the dingo. Who's looking after? Is he just roaming the fields?
Just dodging missiles. Is it something that you've kind of ever thought about of what kind of crazy ideas could be implemented, or what you've kind of maybe heard from your brother and other places?
Yeah, my brother, we haven't had a chance to talk seriously, given he's got kids and I've got kids, and these are heavy issues. No, I don't really have an answer for that. Sorry, Roger.
I've got one. So I think Mark Zuckerberg and the metaverse.
I'm gonna need more.
I think every Palestinian child under the age of 12 gets an Oculus, and they plug in, and there you go.
It's just gonna be like free. It's just gonna be a dozen Hamas soldiers in the tunnels with like 10 Oculus like back to back, just like playing. Isn't there a movie where based on this idea that just everyone's on VR headsets? Yeah. Ready Player One or whatever it is.
Yes, yeah.
I like that. I thought you were going to go somewhere worse with that, which is like they get a plot in the metaverse or something.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I was saying.
What about the Jewish people, Andy? Like, do they not deserve Oculus as well? I mean, Zuckerberg is a Jew, right?
They can get a what's the competitor to Oculus?
They can't be having Android, given that they're jihadists. Well, my idea was more like what happens when is borrowing from the corporate playbook. So it's like, if this area of the world was a company that went off the rails, what would happen? Right? And what would happen is that they would go into administration, and essentially the leadership would be removed and we would be replaced by a responsible third entity. And so my suggestion is that you televise it to kind of fund it all and, make it like a Eurovision thing where you have essentially a mass orgy between Palestinians and the Jewish people. And then you kind of take that cohort of mixed Palestinian Jew babies, and they spend their life essentially in a glorified MBA environment until they're kind of ready to rule. And then they replace the management of both sides, and essentially they make all the administrative decisions for the country. So I feel that's the best way of really diffusing the situation and, essentially, I guess it is a form of ethnic cleansing, but in a more collaborative way. What do you think?
The other option, maybe.
See, I'm not hearing a no.
I'm just trying to build on this. And I might end my contributions for the night on this note is that would work so long as there's a voice.
Is it the South Park song, you don't eat pork, I don't eat pork, we can all get along?
Let's all not eat pork together.
Thank you so much for coming on. I know it's one of those areas that hits close to home, and you've got family and community and all sorts of things. So I hope it wasn't too insensitive, and some of the curiosity about the culture, take it as curiosity, not really otherness. So thank you very much for coming on. And
yeah, thank you so much for reaching out. It's been amazing. I want to put in a pitch that I've got opinions on other topics, not all the topics that you guys talk about. I would love to come back about non-Jewish things. Actually, in preparation for this, I was thinking about what my what's happened to me this week bit of banter would have been at the beginning. And I've got such a good story that is just, it's next level. It is so good. I didn't get the chance. I'm not going to tell it to you now. I'm gonna hope that I get called back, and then I can pretend that it happened that week, and you'll get to hear it.
The very fact that you're giving us a teaser for the next episode means that you will be back. But sorry, Andy and I get to do what happened to us last week, and we were already pinned you for the circumcision story. So we'll try to work it in next time.
Yeah, I know. It is a bit of a who do I think I am. Thinks you can not just climb onto the stage from the audience, but take a seat at the desk.
No, it's been good. Thank you. And great to meet you as well. And thanks for devoting some time on a Friday night. I think what we should make the next one is the top 5 opinions you most disagree with from our past episodes, and we just
love to do that.
Nail them one
I would love to do that.
You'd have to kind of tell us first because we probably forgot what we said. So.
But it would also be.
I said what?
It's so easy to nitpick as well. But also you could gang up on me as well, so that would be fair.
Okay, we'll have that up our sleeve.
Yeah.